The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you on here today. By way of introduction, my name is Rebecca Evans and I'm the EMEA Marketing Manager with Intuition, and I'll be your moderator today for this discussion on the human aspect of cybersecurity. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by the distinguished Ozza Lashe and Francis McKeagney. Ozza Lashe, MBE, is the CEO and founder of our key cybersecurity partner, CybeSafe. Oz has a very successful track record of developing and leading the specialist application of intelligence, cyber and risk management capability. He has extensive experience in the areas of intelligence insight, complex human networks and the human component of cybersecurity risk. Fran McKeagney is the Chief Commercial Officer for Technology with Intuition and our in-house security expert. Fran has spearheaded the development of Intuition's application security channel. Let me quickly outline an agenda for today before handing you over to the guys to get started. The discussion will open with Oz setting the scene and discussing the ever-evolving cyber threat. Fran will then take over to discuss the importance of security education for software developers. Security fundamentals need to be built into the technologies that we use, and that process starts with education. Lastly, we will discuss the importance of cybersecurity awareness for a general audience so that people and businesses can use technologies in a safe and confident manner. Ultimately, we want to share with you all a holistic strategy for approaching the human aspect of cybersecurity. This discussion should take between 30 and 35 minutes. Following that, then, we can answer any questions that you guys raise along the way. So over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and good day to everybody on the call. I'm conscious there are people here from around the globe, and it's really exciting and really good to see. As Rebecca has already suggested, we will start by looking at what the threat is and what the issue is here today. We'll just also make sure that you can see these slides as we're going. The reality is that cybersecurity, information security, data protection, these are issues that are affecting countries all around the world and affecting businesses all over. Cyber attacks are on the rise. And there's absolutely no question that cybercrime as a business is booming. It is a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's affecting lots and lots of industries. Businesses of all sizes are being affected. And although there's quite a lot of discussion about nation states and geopolitical issues and the actors associated and maybe the impact on cybersecurity, the reality is that the everyday person off the street is equally affected. This is interesting and particularly important right now because I suspect many of us around this particular call will have seen examples or situations within our very own businesses, maybe in our personal lives, certainly in the lives of people that we know, and we will have experienced the impact of cybersecurity. The question really is why we're at risk of a cybersecurity breach and why we as businesses may or may not be able to do something about it. In terms of why we're at risk of a cybersecurity breach, well, again, I suspect knowing the people that are on the line, or indeed types of people that are on the line, you'll already be looking and considering that in many different ways. And those reasons stretch from our people, our systems, our networks, the technology we use and how dependent we are upon it, the interconnectedness and the dependence and interreliance. Again, we also place on our various digital support structures. And of course, that's before you even look at very determined groups of hackers, as people would loosely describe them, but they range from one end of the spectrum to hacktivists and people who are doing things for fun, all the way, as I've already mentioned, up to the other end of the spectrum to nation state actors. And then, of course, the added complexity of suppliers and providers, people with whom we do business every day, people with whom we share our information every day, partners with whom we rely on for their support and their services. In terms of the consequences, those are also broad. And quite often we focus on financial consequences as businesses, but the reality is those consequences are broader than financial. They are operational, they include reputational, and they could also arguably be wrapped up in the issue of trust. We will all gravitate as individuals and businesses increasingly to those that we trust, people that we trust, businesses that we trust to look after our finances, to look after our data, businesses and individuals that we trust to do what they say they can do without putting us at risk. And of course, regulators are taking this far more seriously. Governments are legislating for this issue, and regulators are providing guidance with which we have to adhere. And those of us on the call that are from regulated industries will know this well. A good example of something that will reach beyond industries is, for example, the EU GDPR, the EU General Data and Protection Regulation that is going to come into place next year. Another good example of how this is stepping and stretching beyond the boundaries. There's a lot of guidance out there about things we can do to protect ourselves. Governments are providing guidance about what we can do about the problem, and indeed many organisations have really quite effective things in place and ever improving things in place, which is good. And all of these things can be distilled down to a number of principles. Those principles aren't always simple, and indeed some things within those in terms of deliverables might be relatively complex. But one thing that can't be ignored, and a large part of it that is increasingly looked at, is the human aspect. The human aspect is what we are looking forward to talking to you today about, and we're going to talk to you about both sides of that house, whether it's the humans that are making the technology or using it.
Thanks, Oz. Fran McKegney here from Intuition. My focus is on the role of software in the cybersecurity landscape and the challenges and opportunities for software professionals in this regard. So the next few minutes, I'm actually going to turn more to the technical aspect, and we'll return to the end user aspects of cybersecurity later in the webinar. It's a scary time for application security right now. Last year, 70% of all successful breaches came through the software. And in all honesty, the situation is not likely to get better in the coming few years. If you're an organization that builds software, an organization that uses software to generate revenues, then this is a critical subject for you right now. Of course, the situation we find ourselves in has been years in the making. In relation to software security, the tech industry is still in an immature place, although that is finally changing fast. And given that, you have to have sympathy for the users of tech products. On your screen right now, I have a screen grab from my personal copy of 1Password. 1Password is a great product for managing your passwords for various websites that you need in your professional or personal life. It has vaults that you can separate out different parts of your life and different passwords so that they're all held securely in there and so on. If you look at the second item down, you can see that in order for me to manage my professional and personal life, I have 186 logins stored in this application. 186 logins is not a recipe for security success, and definitely not easy for non-technical general users. Of course, security isn't a simple problem. There's multiple participants and multiple roles, and the tech industry is also coming late to addressing the issues. We also have to find a good deal of coordination and coordinated activities to get through this turbulent period. So in relation to what Intuition is doing, we are all of us facing a massive cybersecurity education challenge, and the need for us to change the behavior of individuals, whether they're end users using our tech products or software professionals who are designing and building our products. Now, in this webinar, we're going to focus in on both the end user and the tech side. I'm going to focus in on the creators of technology products, whether those are the devices that we love, or more particularly the software that runs on those devices. And it is fair to say that security was a boring topic to software developers until recently. It's not boring anymore. Higher education, universities are on average late coming to the party here. There are, of course, pioneers in this, but we're now just finding, computer science graduates entering the workplace with secure coding and sufficient application security skills. So you have a couple of generations of software developers that have been learning about security on the job and retrospectively trying to apply secure solutions. The quality of education offerings on the marketplace in terms of application or software security is still quite poor right now. A lot of the focus has been on compliance, and we need to get past just tick box education and engage our developers much more so that their knowledge deepens and our organizations and our applications are more secure. The internet itself, of course, was not built for security, as we've been finding out over the last couple of years. And finally, we want to engage the creators of technology products in solving the problem for end users and making the secure use of technology products much easier and much more secure for end users. So in Intuition, we've kind of set ourselves a couple of goals as we've come in to provide education solutions into the whole cybersecurity area. First one is, to provide, Intuition has a 30-year history of providing first-class e-learning solutions into the financial space. And as we have come into security, we want to apply the same sort of principles of excellence. We view hands-on methodology is critical in this particular arena, and I'll talk more about that in a few moments. But the foundational goal as we build products in this area is to provide robust training that enables software teams to identify and deal with the major security threats. If your software teams do not know what these security threats look like in code and cannot deal with them, then you are more vulnerable as an organization. Of course, as we all know, training takes you so far. After training, people go back to work, and very often within a short period of time have gone back to old, longer established habits. So in addition to the sort of formal training component, we are also trying to help with this longer term and more complex goal of helping you as an organization build and maintain a culture of secure application development, and to make sure that as your teams are designing and building software, that security is at the heart of every decision that's made in that life cycle. And finally, we want to provide an environment in which you can support your people better day to day as they work on projects in relation to application security. So let me turn to the first goal first and give you a little flavor of what we're trying to do in relation to the formal component of it. If there are two words that I would use in relation to what we're trying to do in our sort of formal training elements, it's engagement and visibility. We need to engage software developers so that it's not just checkbox stuff, but they're actually genuinely engaged, so that they deepen their knowledge, deepen their skills, and you as an organization become more secure. Software developers in general are a very bright group, and typically are problem solvers. So we need to engage them in a way that's more robust and appropriate for their organization. So we have gamified environments in which we try to do that. We send them on missions in which they face actual attacks, hacker attacks, and in which they have to identify the attacks and learn to deal with them. We make them go hands-on. They spend their days working in the IDE, writing code, examining code, testing code. And so we employ a learning by doing methodology. It is one thing to watch a video and learn about something. It's an entirely different thing to actually have to go hands-on and actually perform it. One of the really nice things, though, about getting people to do stuff is that you can provide feedback to them. So we set sequences of challenges. As they complete challenges, they accumulate points. We provide a leaderboard so they can see how they're doing versus their peers. That leaderboard is obfuscated completely apart from the user themselves. So the user can see how they're positioned in relation to their peers, but they don't know who's ahead of them and so on. So privacy of participants is ensured, but we try to appeal to that coder and gamer in every software developer. As people progress through, we try to give them as much feedback as possible on how they're doing. So the other side, the flip side of engagement is visibility. So provide visibility to the developers themselves so that, again, it continues the engagement process. So at any stage, they can see, what do I have to do? What do I have to do next? We have a 4-stage security maturity model behind the product. They can progress from security beginner through to security champion. At every stage, they can see what it is that they need to do in terms of the amount of content, the accuracy of the content, the number of hours it's going to take them, and so on. And so they can always see what they need to do to get to the next level. We also show them the security skills that they're building. Very often, skill development is uneven. If they're working on particular kinds of projects, they may develop those skills quite well. but other skills are languish, and those skills become the points of vulnerability. So again, making the skill building visible to the individual so that they can continue to round out their skills. Flip side then is the organization. We obviously provide the same set of visibility to the organization, both in terms of how many people do I have at which level of the organization, and also as an organization, which skills am I building? Which skills look strong? Which skills still need some more work? Are there areas I need to focus in? There may be some additional pieces that I need to do to make my organization more secure. Now, so what we've tried to do through the formal learning component of the product is to really engage them, to encourage them to keep going. We make sure that they face all of the OWASP top 10, for example, the top 10 global security threats, plus a number of other extremely common ones. But in addition to the formal component, there is also lots of other elements that you as an organization need to have to keep your organization secure. So these may be project assets that you are on, projects that you're working on. These may be competitive elements that is relevant to your organization that we can't and shouldn't know about. These may be security policies for your organization. And again, you want to be able to present these and put them in front of your software teams while they're working so that, again, we can build this culture of secure application development. So in addition to the formal training component, we also have a collaboration environment, collaboration platform called Intuition Connect, which we wrap around the product. Available on all form factors, so PC, Mac, Android phones and tablets, iOS and iPhones and iPads and so on. It's a fully featured collaboration platform, chat and discussion, document sharing, whiteboards, scheduled meetings, both audio and video conferencing. And the thinking behind this is to enable you to do more collaborative activities or more activities, educational activities, which are specific to security in the context of your own business. These could be mentoring activities where you have junior developers assigned to senior developers. It may be virtual classes that you want to run. It may be articles that you found that you want to upload and make available. It may be more formal, such as privacy policies and so on. So the mixture of formal and informal, rich collaboration environment is the way that we are trying to increase the skill level of your people and make your organization more secure. At the end of the day, it does make your organization more secure, and it also allows us to have your teams participate in the bigger task of making software generally more secure and easier for end users to navigate. And with that, I'll pass back to Oz for further discussion.
Thank you. I think one thing that's coming across increasingly or very loud and clear is that the cybersecurity issue, as far as people are concerned, is very much a people issue as well as a technology one. And as Fran has just done, he's talked about what that means for those of our organizations who create software. But what I'm now going to talk about are what does that mean for those of us within the organization who make use of this? And the reality is there aren't many people who don't fall into that category, regardless of the type of organization you are, and indeed regardless of how technical you consider yourselves to be. And that's because when it comes to cybersecurity and actually the application of cybersecurity across our data, across our networks, across our systems, what we're really looking at doing is making ourselves as secure and as trustworthy as possible. And so even those of us who have members of our staff or members of our teams who rarely access digital platforms in the course of their work, they probably do so when they're at home. So having people understand this and take the right approach is really quite key. The truth is that most of us as businesses really want to address this issue, either because we're compelled to, the regulator tells us to, or because we know that it's a good thing to do. We see the competitive advantage that it will give us if people trust us more, and as they move away from businesses, they trust less. Or because we know it's bad not to do, and by that, it's because we might have some form of event or some form of incident that would do us harm. The reality is that, as I've mentioned, cyber criminals are getting better and better every day. The key fact, I guess we should bear in the back of our mind as we're talking about this, is a large proportion, indeed in some reports up to 80% of the breaches that take place are not only preventable, but a huge number of them are human related. Now, some of that is because we can have got people to code better, but quite a lot of it's because people could simply have behaved better when using the technology. And that's what we're really addressing. And that's why the partnership that Intuition, Cybersecurity and CyberSafe has is really so exciting. Now, businesses, especially just those that are at leading edges, especially those that consider themselves to be progressive, and more importantly, especially those that are serious about moving on from where they are, both commercially, but also in the way in which they're viewed by their customers and their stakeholders, they're taking a more intelligent approach. And a more intelligent approach for us is one that looks at reducing risk, gaining a competitive advantage, and also increasing the ROI. It doesn't make sense to do things that don't demonstrate either of those three things if you can. And we believe that user awareness and training and the way in which we engage our people so that they know how to behave better online fits into that category. Now, most businesses fall into one of the categories that I show you now on the screen in the spectrum. There aren't that many people now in category one, I would suggest, businesses that don't believe that cybersecurity is important enough to do anything about. Most of us spend a good deal, a notable amount of our efforts trying to be as secure as possible. And there actually aren't many businesses or organizations at the other end of the spectrum, category 5, businesses that believe that they have got it all sewn out. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle, and actually a large chunk of us conduct what many of people would describe as tick box awareness training when it comes to our users. Some form of engagement with our staff that tells them what they should or shouldn't do, be it in the form of providing policies, maybe in some in-person training, maybe even in a digital e-learning program. What we're really going to talk about is how we get more out of that activity and how we do something with that activity that really makes a lasting difference. Here's the question that many businesses and many organizations the world over are asking ourselves. How do we get more and how do we get our people to understand the importance of cybersecurity and data protection, such that they do the simple things, because quite a lot of the things that they're being asked to do are simple. There are lots of them, but they are simple and can be done easily, and such that they will make themselves and the organization more secure. And I think that's really quite important, because when you consider why people don't necessarily take this as seriously as possible, it's sometimes because they can't see the application. And that's true across our businesses. We ask our people to remember, to learn, to do so many things. Of course, when it comes to cybersecurity, it's just another thing on top of that. So how do we do that? The truth is that it's not just a lack of knowledge, and I can say that as somebody who's been looking at this issue for some time, as somebody who's partnered with an organization like Intuition, who over 30 years has been adjusting and addressing knowledge management in order to improve it and optimize it. It's not just a lack of knowledge when it comes to cybersecurity. Many users don't know what to do. And of course, you can look at that with training and education, and many of you on the line here, I suspect, do something about that already. But as I mentioned, it's tick box if it doesn't consider the other issues that get in the way. And the reality is that for users, some of them are apathetic, some of them are disengaged, a few are fearful, and quite a few are just simply confused. There's so much information out there. So when we look at what it takes to get people to behave better, and when we look at a cybersecurity awareness program and an awareness platform that contributes to that, it's those things that also need to be addressed. So it's not just training. Indeed, it's not just simulating attacks as well. That's something that we see, and of course is a really very good mechanism. And we'll talk a bit more in a second about how you measure changes in behavior. But it's not just that, because even that in itself, we have seen has started to breed resentment in some organizations as members of staff or users start to realize that they're being tricked in their mind into doing things. Now, it has a role to play, and I'm going to talk to you about how we think that role can be used effectively. So when we look at awareness, and when we look at the way in which we try to address users, we believe that actually what we should all really be seeking to do is something that is unified, something that engages and changes behavior on the basis of the engagement. This would then lead us to address not just the lack of knowledge, but also the apathy, the lack of engagement, the fear, the confusion that we've talked about before. And all of these things cannot be delivered by a tick box awareness program. What's therefore required is high quality awareness training. Now, there are organizations, again, the world over, that have set that bar and provided an indication of what the framework should be. Making sure that's wrapped into your awareness program is absolutely key. It's key for building faith and confidence in your user base, but it's also key for you as an organization to make sure that your people are being trained in the right thing. And of course, therefore, something that's certified to the appropriate standard would be absolutely right. But you go one stage further than that in this day and age. The threat changes. The reality is that the threat changes because the criminals evolve and get better and better. And therefore, your awareness program and the content also needs to do that, just that. And here, with Intuition Cybersecurity, the program and the platform not only does that, but actually does that automatically, using a series of advanced algorithms and technologies to enable that to happen. And I'm happy to take more questions on that later if that's helpful. Changing behavior is the key, rather than just training people. Changing behavior and measuring the change in behavior. And as I've mentioned, there's a series of activities that go into that. Training and education, measuring the behavior change, in the case of Intuition Cybersecurity, through the simulated attacks, the different types of attack vectors would be part. But also informing and engaging your people so that they understand the context within which they live and operate, and why this is important to them. Again, back as to why it's important to them in their personal lives, as well as to why it's important to them in their business lives. All of these contribute to that broader protection afforded to our organizations. Ultimately, what we're looking to do is reduce risk. And risk, which can be measured in a series of ways, can also be portrayed in a series of ways. That means that when it comes to our users, we can understand where we're vulnerable and what we can do to change those vulnerabilities. We're really quite keen here with Intuition Cybersecurity to ensure that all of our partners that we work with can see this graphically. There are two reasons why this is relevant. The first is that if you're a decision maker who is faced with a series of risks all day, every day, and cybersecurity is another business risk like everything else that needs to be treated, then to be able to see metrics that help you see how that's changing is absolutely key. But the second reason we do that is because it's really important that you can double down on those things that work and do less things of those that don't. And again, we think that any provider of awareness training, regardless, and it's an approach we have adopted and stick closely to, should be able to demonstrate to you that risk reduction graphically. And then, as I've already touched on, but I'll elaborate on now, the way in which you change behavior should feed into those changes in risk. Now, I've mentioned simulated attacks a number of times because it is absolutely has its place in the broader scheme and the broader awareness program piece. And we believe that not only do simulating attacks deliver a degree of confidence or a degree of understanding and reinforcing the learning, but they also enable us to measure those changes in behavior. Those attacks, of course, as we've already discussed at the beginning, are varied. Crooks are getting more and more clever. And a large focus of most of the simulations today across the globe are phishing. But I'm sure those on the line will be aware that it's not just phishing attacks that are the problems that we face as businesses, although, of course, a large proportion of the attacks we face are. So the simulations need to be broader than that, whether it's phishing, whether it's potentially voice activated issues, or phishing as it's known, SMS, text messages, USB stick drops, all of these things contribute. And indeed, in the case of Intuition Cybersecurity, these are all things that are brought to bear in order to help users understand where the threats may be and us to measure the changes. And then moving on to something that we're working on and indeed is currently in this platform, but you're seeing increasingly across the place, attitudes. Users' attitudes towards the risk is absolutely key. And as users, most of us, I've already mentioned, many people being apathetic, fearful, confused. As users, the things that we understand and have a better attitude towards are the things that we will default to and the things that we will display more frequently. And when it comes to cybersecurity, understanding the attitude across your organization is absolutely key. So I would suggest that those of us on this call, as we look at the current programs we do and as we look at the training that we do, the question we ask ourselves is, how do we measure the attitudes and the changes in the attitudes too? Now, one of the things that this approach has enabled us to do, whether we're talking about users or whether we're talking about creators of technology, it enables us to take a broad view, enables us to take a holistic view, and also enables us to take a longer term view over how we reduce risk. But it also enables us to do things right now that can drastically reduce the risks we face as businesses and organizations. And again, this is something that I think when it comes to our users or our creators of the technology, we could all instantly implement.
Thank you so much, Oz and Fran. It's been a very, very insightful session, and there have been questions flying in throughout. So we're going to take some time to answer some of them now. And if anyone on the line has any further questions, please feel free to pop them in the question box, and we'll try our best to get through as many as possible. So here we have one. If the threat isn't going away, what is its future?
Yeah, it's a good question, and indeed one that I think that actually many of us will be asking ourselves. How are we going to deal with this ever-increasing threat? Is it even as bad as people say? And if it is as bad as people say, surely we should just give up and go home. I guess in terms of what the future of the threat is, I think we're going to see a lot of more of the same. Like I said, cybercrime is a booming business. It's an industry in itself, millions of dollars made, and a lot of people are doing very well from it. But the criminals evolve their tactics and their techniques. They not only study how we behave as individuals in order to make their attacks more successful, but they also study the defenses that we put in place to stop them from doing that. And so that will evolve, and we should expect to see that, which is one of the reasons why our approach to cybersecurity awareness is so threat-based and a threat-based. We'll give you a good example of things that we've seen done more recently. We spent some time with let's just say that the wastage from an organized crime group recently, only to find out that this particular organized crime group employed psychologists and behavioral scientists as part of their teams. Psychologists and behavioral scientists who were using psychology theory to better phishing emails and campaigns, and then, of course, advanced technology in order to get around our defenses, cybersecurity defenses. We're going to see much, much more of things like that. And we're also going to see it done on an increasingly wide scale as we all connect even more to each other. The Internet of Things being a really good example of that. We're going to make ourselves more vulnerable. We're going to increase the attack surface, as we would say, in the community. That is not something to be concerned about because, of course, the benefits, I still believe, far outweigh the costs. But it is something we have to take into account. And it's one of the very reasons why we can't ignore the way our people create this technology, and we can't ignore the way we use the technology.
Great, thank you, Oz. Here's another one. Can your security channel product be used in compliance situations?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, again, another interesting question. It's actually an interesting area, the whole area of compliance and what people are doing in relation to compliance. And we're definitely seeing a change on the technical side. Not sure what you're seeing, Oz, in yours. Oz referred earlier in his presentation to tick box education for compliance. The problem with tick box education is it gets you through the compliance requirement, but it doesn't begin to address the problem, doesn't begin to solve the problem. And we're definitely seeing a change in attitude and people really wanting to start to get ahead. So there's a variety of ways in which our product is being used in compliance programs. We've seen sort of single-year compliance program. We're seeing multi-year compliance programs. We're seeing people being allowed to go into learning mode on our platform and then switching it into assessment because we have multiple modes on our platform. We have certificates that, to match the programs that we can put in place, and we can also shape programs to help with compliance requirements. So if any of you out there would like to talk in more depth about this, we would certainly be happy to speak with you about it. It's an area we're definitely seeing changes in.
Great, thanks, Fran. Oz, I think this one is for you. You mentioned that over 75% of cyber attacks are attributed to humans rather than tech. Is this true? And if so, what should we be doing about it as individuals and business leaders?
Yes, I'm not sure who sent that in, but in terms of is it true, i.e. questioning the stats, and it's a good one, statistics, damn lies and statistics. Actually, the reason I mentioned the 75% is actually that's one of the lower quotes, the lower citations that is often used. Some people cite it as up to 90 to 95%. And the reality is we don't get too hung up on the stats. What's really quite clear and very few people dispute is that human beings, when it comes to cyber information security, data protection, human beings have a really key role to play. There are some that would describe people as the weakest link. We don't buy into that. Actually, we think it's actually a rather negative way to speak of those of us who are on the front line, and actually those of us who can have the biggest impact. The reason people think of humans as the weakest link is simply because they're not really considering the potential. So the stats are true depending on what you read. There might be slightly more than that. But more importantly, what can we do about it if this is true? I think that's really the subject of our discussion today, and really the subject, I suspect, of the discussions going on in many of the organizations that we represent. As people, we can behave better. This is the truth of it. Some of us don't know what to do, and therefore we need to be shown. And some of us need to be encouraged by good practices, maybe even demonstrated. And as I've mentioned, there is a role to play for simulated attacks and other things that can positively help people see the benefits. But like I said, on both cases, this is about helping people see why this is relevant to them as individuals and the organization, whether that is a developer who's writing software, or whether that is a user, a member of the staff, whether they are junior or senior, because of course we're seeing both ends and everything in between being affected. Helping us all understand why this is important, helping us understand that something can be done, and then helping us see the benefits of that is really quite key. And so again, a good example in Intuition Cybersecurity, one of the reasons we provide the features in order to share information so that users who use the platform can share it with their friends and family, so that we can spread that net, spread that knowledge, and help people see how they can be protected at home as well as in the workplace.
Great, thanks, Oz. Another one here. We see and read about the cyber threat in the press today. However, there's clearly a great deal going on behind the scenes that we aren't aware of. Can you summarise the state of cybercrime in the world today? It's a good question.
It is a good one. It is a good one, and I must avoid the trap of joining the brigade of conspiracy theorists to talk about everything that's going on behind the scenes of what we read. Partly because I suspect we don't have enough time on the call, and partly because, of course, I'm not the be all and end all of knowledge of everything that's going on. But there is a lot. There is a lot, and whether that is nation state activity, whether that is large organized crime groups, whether that is the production of application and code that has been designed for good use and is now being used for bad, these things are complicated. What does that mean for us? What do we expect to see? What does that mean for us as businesses, ultimately, who are just trying to deliver what we do and make the best use of technology? Some of the things that we have watched, WannaCry, recently, Petya virus, and then the follow-up not Petya virus that we saw again early on this year. These were things that had huge impact on a number of what I would consider, and many people acknowledge, were unintentional targets, because sometimes these things simply can't be controlled, and sometimes they're deliberately set out for unintentional targets. They're not necessarily focused on any particular organization. We then see some really quite specific targeting, Ukraine energy grid as a good example, democratic processes in a number of different countries around the world recently. These are things that are arguably starting behind the scenes but making their ways to our front pages. So I would suggest that in terms of what we're seeing, again, we should expect much, much more of the same. That's not to paint a picture of doom and gloom or indeed fear at all. In fact, far from it. It's really just to point out that this is the world that we live in nowadays. And as businesses, we need to simply just make sure we do everything we can do. And I think, Fran, it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side of that, we're seeing the tech industry, regulations, politicians, a huge response, a very fast response to this. It's, we've got 40 years of software, and we've got multiple legacy systems out there. We've got lots of creaky doors that the bad guys can get in through. So, as I said, it's a complex issue, and many players that need to come together to kind of get us through this. But it's now happening really fast. Tech companies are sharing information very openly with each other. We have so not just on the criminal side, but on the response side, we're seeing a great deal of, increased urgency, a lot more coordinated efforts coming on. There's no question we will take this to another level. It's going to take us some time to get to a much safer place. But I think some of the best minds on the planet are now working on this, and we have companies coming together to try to solve these issues. So it's not a one-sided story.
Great, thanks guys. One more here. What programming languages does your product cover? More specifically, do you include Ruby on Rails? I think that's for you, Fran.
Yeah, that's very practical. Just a little bit before I answer that question, so the security channel gets software teams, software developers to face the kinds of attacks that we need to be able to withstand as organizations. There is a global organization out there known as OWASP, a not-for-profit organization, which is essentially security professionals around the world who categorize the most common, the most destructive attacks and organize them into what's called the OWASP Top 10 that has just been updated this summer. So there's a new OWASP 2017 coming out. So we address all of the OWASP Top 10 and many of the other. But obviously, you working in a particular organization will have a language, whether it's Java or Ruby or C# or whatever it is. So our product does cover all of the major computing languages from Java, C#, the JavaScript language such as Angular and Node, the mobile languages, Android or Swift for iOS development and so on. Some of those in our product are more mature and some are still in development. And again, if people need language roadmaps or development roadmaps, we're very happy to provide them.
Great. I think we've time just then for one more question. So here we are. What can we and should we demand of our providers and suppliers in order to protect our data and vulnerabilities?
Yes, it's a good question again, because the reality is we all fit into the supply chain somewhere. All of our businesses generally are so connected, and one of those connections is to those people that supply services, products, software to us. So in terms of what we should demand, well, actually, I think that what we're going to find, and certainly if you use, for example, or process data that belongs to EU subjects, you're going to find yourself increasingly encouraged, if not demanded, by your regulating body, which in the UK, for example, would be the ICO. There are over 40 of them around the world. You will find yourself expected to ask of your suppliers that they take their approach to information and data security as seriously as you do. Because, of course, the liability and culpability is shifting under a series of changing regulations around the globe. But in essence and in practical sense, what does that physically mean? I think asking our suppliers and our contractors to explain to us how they look after their information, explain to us how they train their people, if indeed we believe that the people component is important, or explain to us how our data is encrypted and where it resides. These are all really quite sensible questions and are not inappropriate for us to be turning to our suppliers and contractors. I suspect, knowing some of the companies that are on the line, you've gone further than that still, and that's not surprising, with contractual arrangements and agreements being combed over, again, to ensure that none of us have any gaps between the way in which we are behaving, but also those that are providing services to us are also behaving. So that's what I would say. Turn to them and be very open and very honest. We take this stuff seriously. Can you please show us that you take it as seriously as well?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you've said, Oz. I mean, besides the physical cost of repairing successful breaches, there is the loss of reputation that ensues from this. We look at the Equifax breach last week in the United States, 143 million records. These things can be devastating, so we need to be open, and in our own practices we need to be rigorous, and as we work with partners and clients, we need to be prepared to face into the rigor of their inquiries. So totally agree.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Someone's asking about the dark web for research purposes.
And use of the dark web for research purposes?
I think so. It's quite high level.
Yeah. So and sorry, obviously not entirely sure whether maybe as you're typing that question, you can type clarifications if I'm off. But on the assumption that and indeed the dark web does come up regularly in conversations. And for those that I suspect most people on the call will be aware that part of the web that is not necessarily indexed is what most people are referring to, and then that bit of it that's used for nefarious purposes being the dark bit. For research purposes, yes, I guess it will have its merits. The reality is that it works both ways. Much of the information and data that we're talking about is traded on the dark web, and indeed, I mentioned to you apathy as one of the issues that faces our users. And one of the big reasons that some people are many of our users are so apathetic is they don't think this is going to happen to them. Why would anybody want to attack me? Why would anybody want my data? Why would anybody be concerned with a piece of script or a piece of code that I write? And the fact of the matter is that vulnerabilities or information is traded and shared, and many of the things end up on the dark web. So I think actually in terms of understanding where you might be vulnerable, for those types of research purposes, the dark web wouldn't be a bad place to start, but actually don't underestimate how frequently the crooks that we're up against use it for their own research too.
Very interesting. Thank you, Oz. I think that's all we have time for today, so I think we're going to finish it up there. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a very insightful afternoon, and I hope everyone on the line has enjoyed it as much as I have. And we'll be sure to send you on the recording and the slides. And if there's any questions, please be sure to get in touch with us here at Intuition. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.